Back in 2020, this virus, it wasn't just a test for our hospitals, was it? It was this massive, brutal stress test for the very heart of our economy, corporate governance. And man, what it showed us was a system that was way more fragile than any of us thought. So today, we're going to dig in and ask, why?
Right. So this really is the billion-dollar question, isn't it? I mean, we just came off a decade of incredible, record-breaking profits. So how is it that so many of these corporate giants with these super experienced boards just crumbled? Like a house of cards the second real trouble hit. What on earth went so wrong here?
The best way to think about this is like the pandemic was the ultimate final exam. The one nobody saw coming, and definitely nobody studied for. And it wasn't just a pop quiz on a company's balance sheet either. No, this was a test of everything. Leadership, their ability to look ahead, their entire foundation. We're always told a corporate board is like the captain of a ship, right? Their whole job is to be on the lookout, see the storm clouds gathering, and steer that big ship to safety. But when the COVID storm actually hit, wow, it became painfully obvious that a lot of these ships weren't just unprepared. They were completely unseaworthy. They were never built for rough seas to begin with.
Okay, so let's get into the diagnosis. Why did so many companies fail this test so spectacularly? Well, it wasn't just one mistake. It wasn't a single bad call. What the evidence shows is a whole chain of interconnected failures, a deep, systemic problem with the way we run our biggest companies. And when you look at what went wrong, it's like a domino effect. First, you have the boards and risk officers, the very people paid to see what's coming. They just didn't. They completely missed the risk, or they just brushed it off. And you have to ask why, right? Well, it's because the entire system, the whole game, was rigged for short-term wins. It was all about this quarter's earnings, this week's stock price. Long-term stability? That wasn't really the focus. So, of course, they had no cash saved up. And when the music stopped and the revenue dried up, what was left? They had to let people go and go running to the government, cap in hand, for a bailout. This quote just hits it right on the head. Think about it. Any financial advisor you talk to will tell you, they'll tell me, hey, you need an emergency fund. 6 months, maybe even a year of living expenses stashed away. It's just basic common sense, right? Financial planning 101. So how in the world were these massive, multi-billion-dollar companies with all their experts not held to that same simple standard? So where did all the money go? I mean, we're talking about a decade of record earnings. It's not like the cash wasn't there. Well, here's the answer. Instead of building a rainy day fund, they shoveled it all back to shareholders. They did it through dividends and, maybe more importantly, massive stock buybacks. And why'd they do that? Simple. It juices the stock price. And when the stock price goes up, guess what else goes up? Executive paychecks. It's this perfect, vicious cycle of short-term thinking. And what was the result of all this? Well, when the crisis finally hit, who do you think had to foot the bill? We did. The taxpayers. The U.S. government alone had to pump a mind-boggling $4 trillion into the economy just to keep it from collapsing. A huge chunk of that went to bail out the very same companies that chose not to prepare. It's that classic story, isn't it? The profits were privatized for a select few, but the risk was socialized for everyone. Okay, so this massive failure forced a huge reckoning, a major rethinking of how we do things. That old corporate playbook, the one that was obsessed with efficiency above all else, was suddenly useless, worthless even. A new word had to enter the vocabulary: resilience. And this slide lays out that fundamental shift perfectly. For decades, the mantra was all about efficiency. That meant things like just-in-time supply chains stretching all over the globe and getting rid of any excess cash by giving it back to investors. And look, it worked great as long as the world was calm and predictable. But now, the new model is all about resilience. That means having some slack in the system. It means having those cash reserves. It means building stronger supply chains closer to home. And it means investing in your people. Sure, it might look a little less efficient on a spreadsheet in the good times, but it's the only thing that lets you survive the bad ones. But this whole shift from efficiency to resilience, it's not just about logistics and cash. It's tied to a much bigger, almost philosophical question. What is a corporation for? Who's it really supposed to serve?
And this table really breaks down the two big competing ideas.
On one side, you've got the shareholder model. This has been the dominant way of thinking for like the last 40 years. It's simple. A company's only real job is to make as much money as possible for its owners, the shareholders. But on the other side, you have the stakeholder model. And this view says, hold on a second. A company has a responsibility to a much wider group of people, its employees, its customers, its suppliers, even the community it operates in. And what the pandemic did was just brutally expose the huge risks of focusing only on that first model.
And what's really fascinating here is that this shift in thinking was actually starting to happen before the pandemic. I mean, check this out. In 2019, the Business Roundtable, we're talking the biggest CEOs in America, they put out the statement basically saying they were moving on from the shareholder-only model. Of course, at the time, it was just words on paper. The pandemic just lit a fire under everyone and made it urgent to turn those words into real action.
And listen, this isn't some new, radical idea. There's actually a lot of history here. Take a look at H.J. Heinz way back during the Great Depression. While pretty much every other company was laying people off, Heinz made a choice to keep its entire workforce employed. And that wasn't just them being nice, it was a brilliant strategic move. It built this incredible bond, this deep loyalty with their employees and their customers. And that loyalty became a huge competitive advantage for them for decades to come. So, okay, the old playbook is broken. We get it. The big question is, what does the new one look like? Let's dive into some of the actual, concrete proposals that have come out of this crisis for building a stronger, more resilient corporate world.
All right, so here's a look at the new blueprint. First up, making stress tests mandatory for big decisions. Just like the banks have to do. Next, we're talking about really empowering the chief risk officer, so they're not just some person in the corner taking boxes for compliance. Then, a huge one, getting more diverse and independent voices into the boardroom to challenge old ways of thinking. We also need to totally rethink how we pay executives, tying their bonuses to the long-term health of the company, not just a short-term stock price jump. And finally, and this is critical, giving workers a real voice, a real seat at the table. Now, one of the boldest ideas out there is to completely shake up the ownership structure itself. Here's how it would work. You create these special trusts at the company level for employees. Then you allocate a pretty big chunk of the company's stock, we're talking maybe 10, 20, even 30%, into these trusts. And that stock is held there forever, for the benefit of all employees. What this does is it makes workers actual, genuine stakeholders. Their interests are now perfectly aligned with the long-term health and success of the whole company. When you look at it on a chart like this, it seems like a simple rebalancing of the pie, right? But don't be fooled. In practice, this is a pretty revolutionary idea. It means that the people on the ground actually creating the value get a real share of the rewards. And, just as important, they get a real voice in the company's future. At the end of the day, it's about getting everyone, from the CEO to the frontline worker, pulling in the same direction for the long haul. So if there's one thing to take away from all this, it's pretty clear. The pandemic stress test proved beyond a doubt that a system built only for calm, stable times is dangerously fragile. It's brittle. We absolutely need a new playbook. And this new playbook has to be designed not just for efficiency, but for resilience. And I think for shared prosperity too. And look, we need this new playbook now, not tomorrow, not next year. Because this quote, it's pretty chilling, but it's true. The pandemic was just one test. The next crisis is already waiting in the wings. And the lessons we're talking about today, they aren't just some academic exercise. They are absolutely essential for what comes next. So that's where we are. We've seen the system's fragility laid bare. We actually have the blueprint for how to rebuild it and make it stronger. The only question left is, are we going to do it? Or are we just going to wait for the next storm, a bigger one, to hit us? Really, the choice is ours.